Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined in person for the first time ever by Matthias Nordvig. Or
Hello.
Dr. Matthias Nordvig, sorry, I did you a disservice.
Yes, you got to get the title in there. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast, here live at the Midgardsblot. We are in Midgard Centered, and we are going to start off with a nice little panel talk with some of the guests who have been giving talks here in the Mimia Talks. We have Dr. Frederick Gregorius here, Dr. Sophia van Herpen, and Tim Talesman, and PhD candidate Jim Glassett as well. So welcome. And we are going to be talking about constructing the Viking Age between academia and popular culture. So I hope you guys have some awesome things to say. Do we have a
pressure.
Microphone that we can circulate? I want to start out by asking you guys, academics in particular, how are we as academics constructing the Viking Age? I think we are often presenting our knowledge as something that is more or less finite, or at least has something very concrete to say about the Viking Age. But I also know that most of us as scholars are painfully aware of the fact that, well, that's not really the case. So maybe, Sophia, do you have something you would want to weigh in on with that?
Is this working?
It sounds like it.
Okay. That was actually a question that was asked to me when I gave my talk. I think we are always talking about our interpretation of what we study. I mean, I study texts, so that is already an interpretation of how it was, how the Viking Age was, and I'm giving my interpretation of that. So it's an interpretation of an interpretation, and usually I give my opinion to a room of academics. So this was the first time that I gave it to a larger public, which was interesting.
In what way was that interesting? What differences do you see in terms of like questions and reactions to what you're doing?
I think in academia it's more about well, we treat sources, and it's we often get reactions on, well, it's just a literary text, so you should be aware of that it's not historical, or you should link it to archaeological finds. And here people are just more interested in how you see it. They want to learn more.
So essentially, what we experience as scholars, having our little ivory tower debates about these texts and how we can use them as sources to the Viking Age, we quickly, I guess, maybe run into a consensus where we agree on all these different factors that that we have to take into account. We don't necessarily have to explicate them, but then what we see from the public is more of a, well, I want to access the information that you have in particular and how you interpret it.
Sometimes in academia we get a bit lost in the discussion between fact and fiction, and here it was, we want to learn more about what you know about these people this time, how you see it. So that was an interesting experience, I think. For me.
Yeah, that's great.
My question is to all the academics is, how conscious is it that you have to take a step back sometimes and look at it from like just the academic view and try and look at it from different angles, maybe like the layperson, and how much can you trust the academics that have gone before? Because I imagine everything is kind of built on the people before you and who's come before you and their work and their studies, and how you can always trust that. And do you always try to go back to the original material, or as far back as you can, where you can? I guess that's for Matthias, for you, Sophie, for you as well, Frederick.
Okay, sorry, I'm a bit confused here. Is this no?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, how conscious academics are?
Yeah, to kind of step out of the academic world, because it feels like it gets stuck.
Incestuous.
Sometimes
That's what it is.
I don't want to be offensive either.
Circle jerk.
Yeah, it feels like sometimes academics can kind of shut off maybe and dismiss, not all academics, but some certainly kind of dismiss other avenues, and don't always talk to each other as well in different fields. You kind of, as I mean you personally, but academics as a whole, sometimes you'll have your area, and then you'll kind of stick with that and prep. Well, in most cases you spend decades studying it, and you kind of get very precious about it. And then maybe I wish everybody spoke a little more, I guess. We mentioned that on the podcast a few times.
Well, yeah, I guess the subject that you're hinting at is like, how much do individual academics rely on a particular academic tradition that they belong to, and how comfortable are they, expanding from there?
I'm not here just to offend the academics.
No.
I just get away with it because I smile.
I'm not that offended. I mean, because I tend to study the reception of Old Norse religion. I also, of course, study the reception academically of Old Norse religion. And it is a very good subject where it's actually been a lot of trends. You do see, like, in a certain degree, we just look at the early 2000s, when basically there was a previous project called Roads to Midgard, which was in Sweden. It was a big project that dealt with new interpretations of Old Norse religion. But it was also very clear that it was ideologically based. It was a lot of deconstruction, because the big trend was we're going to go against Dumézil and the kind of theories of Indo-European heritage and that stuff, because they were considered to be racist. And there was a scholar called Bruce Lincoln, I think it's still his name, of course, because he's still alive, that became very, very influential in this kind of reception of Old Norse religion. The big thing was to deconstruct it. Everything was local. We couldn't know anything. The Icelandic texts were just Christian propaganda and so forth. It wasn't necessarily based on any real academic, empirical reasoning. It was more based on an ideological understanding. And I think that's a big problem sometimes, particularly when it comes to like Old Norse religion, Old Nordic religion, that is very rarely neutral. It's always based on an ideological understanding. And it's not only because it's a lot of academics, at least in Sweden, I've got this experience that there is a tendency, and I'm not trying to be rude to my many times very great Swedish scholars here, but
you tell me what you want to say and I'll be rude.
Yeah.
You can live.
But there is no doubt that sometimes you do have a tendency to interpret findings and in text in a way that seems to fit a particular narrative that is more suitable. It's nicer, for example. For a while, there was this, for example, did the Vikings have close connections to Islam? Is an example. There was a fabric that was interpreted. People made a big fuss about it, that, this should be an example of, that Vikings, burial of a woman, that she was, probably a Shia Muslim, basically. It didn't make sense. Islamic scholars said that there's no way that this could be that case, because this particular pattern was much later. And so there was but it was very clear that it was, in the same way that earlier studies of Old Norse religion were based on a kind of, they wanted to present, a glorious past or anything like that. And I think that's the main challenge in academia. It is always based on preconceived theoretical and ideological notions. And I don't think it's ever possible to get away from that. I think we always have preconceived notions. We never sort of address a subject completely neutral. But I think that's something that academics should be aware of, including myself. I mean, I'm also, of course, based on a certain ideological framework that I work with consciously or unconsciously. But I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, I agree a lot. Yeah.
Absolutely. The other thing is how accepting do you find it of change? Because obviously technology changes, ideas change. This thing's ever growing. So it's like almost like an organic thing. It's always changing as we discover more. And I imagine that can be quite, not damaging to the ego, but if you spend a decade on a certain idea and then something comes along and counteracts that, and no matter how much you think that was real for so long, or that was how things went, like, how does that feel? I guess that must, I don't know if any of you have ever experienced that personally, like you've really studied something and then technology or something's discovered and it's just like, shit, all this is not what I thought it was.
I think every scholar says that that's the dream. I think everyone actually experienced this as the nightmare, because I don't think anyone wants to have the theories disproven.
No, absolutely.
But everyone wants to say that they want to have it disproven. So I mean, that's a very typical. I think like Richard Dawkins talks about it in one of his books, that, you know, this professor who suddenly realized that some of his discoveries were completely wrong, and he just accepted it and was so happy about it because, you know, science moves forward. But we do have egos. Many of us have quite massive egos.
I mean,
and
yeah, seen this guy?
So yeah, but I mean,
giant head.
If you ever been in academia, I mean, academics, particularly in the history of religion, can be like big babies. You know, people are, you know, sometimes it's been like physically fighting with each other over things. So.
Have you Matthias, had anything you've done shit on?
I mean, sometimes you accidentally criticize somebody's book, and then all of a sudden I would love
you had that soundboard working right now.
Yeah, could you please pass the mic over here, and then let's focus a little bit more about on how do we I want to ask the question essentially, how do we appropriately use academic knowledge, academic texts in a way that it can be useful to the general public? I think that's a good place to start. And I wonder which one of you three over here would like to. Yes, Jim? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well up for answering that. As my focus is on experimental archaeology. I'm figuring out how things were done and what that tells it. Yeah, what the techniques used in non-ferrous metal working, that's what I was talking about earlier, in the Viking Age, what that tells us about society. And one of the reasons why I'm doing that is because over the last 20 odd years, I've been demonstrating the kind of craft work. I've been in lots of situations, in museums, providing public interpretation of material culture, and providing that interface between sort of the academia and general public. And the public, families with kids ask the best questions. What's that? Why is that? And it forces you to kind of question, sort of the archaeological record yourself. And I'm very concerned with material remains, interpreting those, helping to advance interpretation and figuring out what that tells us about Viking Age society, and then presenting that back to the public in museum situations, at reenactment events. I personally hate the idea of the ivory tower. Knowledge shouldn't be constrained. It should be passed straight back to, the people who are interested, and everybody loves the Viking Age. I presume everybody in this room loves the Viking Age. But, it's not just us. There's a lot of people out there. It's this kind of great catch-all that brings people in, and I just want the information that goes before the public to be as well understood as possible. I mean, yes, we can all argue about minor differences of interpretation, and we all have our own specialities. I just want,
Okay, perfect. I guess to strip it back to its core, what is experimental archaeology?
Experimental archaeology is recreating past circumstances to understand processes. That's a very processual archaeology way of looking at it. Further theoretical developments in archaeology kind of allow for and constrain, what you say you can do. Personally, I'm very into the idea of reconstructing process to be able to observe that process. There's a little bit of an argument in experimental archaeology about it, about reconstructing experience, and I really don't, I don't want to follow some kind of phenomenological view that you can understand what people were thinking. They're completely different people. people 1,000 years ago didn't experience the world the way that we do. That's we can say that for sure. But I do think we can get a glimpse of their world by understanding how they did things.
Mm-hmm. I think that's interesting because I think whilst we are different, I think we're also very similar. I think we sometimes forget that as well. When we think of these people 1,000 years ago, we almost forget that they're humans. They love, they care, they feel all the emotions that we feel today. But I think sometimes we remove ourselves from that and just think, oh, it's someone 1,000 years ago. They've got nothing in common with me. And I think we really do. You have, when when we've spoken about some of the texts and the rune sticks and things found, that they have things of like calling people each other dicks or like being in love and all these like silly little things. Like, you're just a fucking human like I am, and you do graffiti the same as I do. And
in a way, and in a way,
I don't
not,
do graffiti,
right?
by the way.
I'll take that. I'll take that. But when it comes to something, what I'm particularly concerned with is working of metals and transformation of materials from one form to another. I think I'm increasingly looking at that in a from a point of view that they thought about it differently. They were viewing the world through through the lens of their own culture. I can now tell you exactly what elements are in a metal alloy and its exact melting point. 1,000 years ago, they wouldn't have that knowledge. They would understand it completely differently, and they would understand. They would have a completely different conceptual construction on how what they were doing worked. That can be seen through. If you go and look at the 12th century writer Theophilus, and look at some of the recipes that he used for metalworking, you have like kind of the most amazing kind of explanations for things which make absolutely no sense whatsoever. You can interpret processes that do make sense from a scientific standpoint, and then he goes and throws something completely wacky into the mix. And he gets a lot of criticism for recipes for how to make gold by first breeding a basilisk.
I mean, that's what you do, right? Like,
but with careful use, his text can be made can be used to produce processes that do actually work.
It doesn't matter how you get there. It's all about getting there somehow. No, I really like the idea of experimental archaeology. I think that we forget sometimes you just have to get your hands dirty and try and practice. And, like we said earlier in your talk, you can look at what's in there. You can look at it in a lab as much as you want and strip it back to its parts and all that. But until you really try making it, you might just not see everything. There's different angles, something might not work. And when you actually try to do it, you're probably going to come across problems, things that they may have solved. It's fascinating. But how accepted is experimental archaeology by academia? Because I feel like it could be one that's maybe poo-pooed a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, that really depends on who you ask, I think. But I think you're an example of it becoming more accepted now, working with it in a university setting.
It's quite heavily used in lithic studies, understanding manufacturing use of stone tools, and that's where basic theoretical concepts have been developed that I'm pushing into slightly different realms and doing something a little bit more complex with that I'm hoping is going to stand up.
Yeah, but also
not at all nervous.
Yeah, and then I think we've seen it. One of the earliest examples of experimental archaeology is actually with Viking shipbuilding, like reproducing Viking ships with the original tools and building methods and everything. That's relatively old for academia, I'd say. Yeah. So that would probably be one of the examples of early acceptance of experimental archaeology. But otherwise, there are definitely also those that are like, well, you can't really say anything about this because you're just some dude trying it out. Like, so screw that.
Well, that's kind of what I wondered is if you don't have the right letters after your name? Do they sometimes just get ignored because it's, maybe just like it's not thought of as proper science, I guess? I don't know.
Well, I mean, so that's actually one of the interesting things, and that's also perhaps a little bit of a question for you, Tim Nancaro, because what we should be asking in terms of like academic investigations of such things as producing ancient tools or jewelry and such, and also trying to reconstruct rituals or understand ritual processes in a pre-Christian, prehistoric context, right? What is a good method for approaching that?
Look, I would probably be excoriated if I said this in an academic context, and at some point I probably will because I'm a bit of a cheeky bugger. Look, you touched on a point just before, like that repudiation from academia, from the more learned scholars, that I think there is a perceived sort of elitism, a pushback. Oh, well, you haven't spent 6, 8, 10, however many fucking years going through all of these archaic sources, and like that's crap. Like the people that lived in our pre-Christian Germanic Viking societies, yes, they had their learned scholars, they had their pillars of wisdom, but again, like these are social hierarchies that exist today. But you had people there, like you had a dude on a farm that, I want to appease the gods. I don't want to have to journey 3 days by horseback past, the erupting, volatile volcano to get the local, Volva or Ceres to come out and bless my land. I'll go and do it myself. I may not have all of the right tools or the specialist knowledge, but there's I think an inherent intention there on a very human level that I think we all still have to. I might not have the bona fides and the letters after my name, but like that doesn't preclude me from actually having a crack at it. And I think this is a really important thing, and why I particularly love the idea of experimental archaeology. And I like to see it with ritual practitioners, the stuff that Tim is doing as well, with, bardic interpretation, taking old things and using them in new ways, or like play with it, explore it, experiment with it, because you either learn or you understand more. And even if everything you do is spent going, no, that's not actually how it would have worked, that still contributes to our overall understanding. And I think that's ultimately for everyone's benefit, because we want to learn more about these things.
You usually learn more by fucking up.
Well, that's it. For every ivory tower academic that's, I've spent 5 decades studying this.
I feel like we're just smashing academics here. I do apologize.
No. And it's not to discount the immense work they do. Like, we do owe an enormous amount to, these individuals that sacrificed their entire lives going down this road, and we wouldn't do it if we weren't passionate about it. But I think there comes a point where the public, particularly when it's like publicly funded, I think there is a legitimate question there to say, well, what is the value of your research? What is your contribution to this age, this era, this present? Yeah, it's great to have history tours and all sorts of things, but I think you need to be giving something more back to the public to help them understand what can we learn from these people to get things better, learning from history's mistakes and all those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. I mean, some academics do, I guess. Matthias, you spend your time sat with me, teaching me every week. And obviously we have guests that come and join us and spend their time and teach us knowledge. So, not everyone, I guess, wants to hold on to it like my precious. But some do.
Well, but, I think it's less of, knowledge hoarding and more of like, I dove into this rabbit hole and I'm never coming out. That's really what happened, right? So you just got lost in the rabbit hole.
I might just, it's just like you're patient with me. Like, we've done this for over 100 and we're coming up to like 130 episodes. You've been very patient. Whereas I think from, you get people who studied a certain area for 20 years and then you get someone like me that knows nothing. And I'm just like, help me, teach me about this. Or like, what does this mean? It's like, I guess it's such a disconnect and such a difference of knowledge. Like, how do you even start? Because as we say through the podcast all the time, it's complicated. Mm-hmm. And the more you go down the rabbit hole of your specialist subject, the deeper you get and the harder it is. Well, the more complicated it is, the more kind of like, fuck, none of this makes sense, but it all makes sense. So it's even harder, I guess, to try and then just pass it on.
I mean, I think what happens is essentially that in different ways, people who are at least interested in approaching each other are inching closer and closer together, and Midgardsblot is an example of that as well, where you have a public that's interested in heavy metal and think Vikings are cool, and I want to have blood on my face and all that funky stuff. And then you have academics as well who are interested in and enjoy interacting with those people with blood on their face, right? Mm-hmm. So in that sense, some of them might even be people who also go and get blood on their face, you know. So in that sense, you do have more of a coming together in different ways, mm-hmm. and that's actually. I would say thanks to all the stories and narratives that are out there and being publicly disseminated through media in different ways about Vikings, about Nordic mythology. And this is the ball that I'm now kicking to Tim Talesman. And I'd like to ask you, what is a good process for taking ancient tales and myths and then making them relevant to an audience, as you did the other day when you gave this awesome talk about Ragnarok and all the things. So take it away with it.
Well, it's I have to go back to a couple of years where I met Einar from Madruna, and he was doing a lecture about musical instruments, and at a certain time he told that it's very important to maintain and tell the old stories, but it was equally important to make new stories, and which I found very interesting. And I would the upcoming movies from Marvel and stuff, people are taking the Thor they see in the movies as the Thor. We talk about the myths, and usually I start my stories well. I like this Marvel Thor and Chris Hemsworth doing an awesome job, but in my opinion, it's not a. And so I usually tell, starting with my stories, that I love Chris Hemsworth, but to me he's like a blonde pretty boy, and this is Thor, with the red beard, and
he's very pretty.
And that's why with making new stories, it's you can turn the old stories into a modern way, but that's why I'm making new stories. But because it's working in a better way to place modern day myths into today's stories, because you can make references, like with Ragnarok, for instance. With what's going on today in the world, you could say that some people, like in Ukraine, would say Ragnarok is happening at this moment, because their whole world is being shredded. And so, of course, those old stories can be relevant. But in my point of view, it would be better to make new stories, stories that everybody lives today. You get a better connection.
That's a good point, because I think we also forget that the world was a lot smaller back then. Whereas when we speak today, we say the world. We're a global society. We know the world is the world. Whereas back when you didn't have a phone and the internet and you couldn't speak to people on the other side of the world, your world is maybe your village or the 10 miles around that. And if something happens to that, then that's...
In story I'm doing later this evening, Balder returns to Midgard, and he finds that, as you can expand your mind, learning more, so too Ymir's call has grown, and found that Midgard is way bigger than it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Oh, cool. I like that. Midgard is way bigger than it used to be.
I guess it grows the further they travel, the more they learn.
Well, yeah, I mean, that I guess that says a lot about the myths, because like Midgard is, or the world in Nordic mythology is essentially a bunch of houses and a temple and a burial mound that is mentioned in stanza 7 of Midgardsblot.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells you a little about their perspective back then, I think. Then there's a tree over here, and it's like, yeah, that looks like an Iron Age village right there.
One thing I wanted to say earlier, I remember when we first started this podcast, I had this very romanticized version of how academia worked. Mm-hmm. And because I don't come from that, I was a plumber for 13 years and fell into this somehow. And I thought that like there was this big database of information and all academics spoke to each other, and there was just this one. I mean, I'm sure it sounds great to you guys. Yes. It sounds perfect for you.
Actually, we do. We meet in this grand golden palace where we all like drink wine and
but I thought
get along just fine.
I remember one of the early episodes. I think I said to you, I'm like, so there isn't just this database of like everything everybody knows that just gets put together and sorted neatly, and then you can all just pull it out and go, okay, well that person knew this. I'm studying I'm studying this, and this is what everybody ever has written about this.
No,
I really thought that's how it worked, and you smashed it apart like everything else I've ever thought I knew about all of this.
Most of this podcast has basically just been disappointment for Dan. Poor guy.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. Because everything I've ever heard about the Viking Age has been destroyed slowly by you or somebody else.
I started out being polite about it, and then I just got more and more careless.
Yeah. So how much do you this is a question, I guess, for everybody. How accurate do you think we know? Well, how accurate do you think we are when it comes to what we know about the Viking Age? I guess everyone's going to have a different opinion on it. Do you think we're close, or do you think we're miles off? Because I know from our episodes, we know fucking nothing. Mm-hmm. Like that's pretty much the consensus I've got from.
If you want to be responsible, in my opinion at least, if you want to be responsible,
this is the other thing. Mm-hmm. All academics do this, or you do this a lot. It's you have like
now the truth comes out.
Yeah, you have two modes. It's like I'm going to say this in private. But this is my academic. This is my academic reputation, so I'm going to say this. Yes. And I feel like that's probably what all academics are like. They have their private opinion and then the public one that they say to the peers.
Yes. Yeah, that is the mode that you would need to have as an academic. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise somebody's going to write a really horrible review of your book. So what you need to do is if nothing else, preface with like, well, I have an opinion on this, and it might not, fully jive with established scholarship, or you'll say, well, if I'm going to answer this responsibly, I will say A, B, C, D, right? So
you have your disclaimer.
Yeah,
I've seen you use that a lot already in the last few days.
It's kind of hard though. I mean, we're talking now about the Vikings and all the things we dug up. But, imagine in like 1,000 years, people dig stuff up about us and they find a Vogue magazine and they go, well, this is how they dressed. Mm-hmm. It's a bit of the same what we're doing now with the Vikings. We're finding stuff, and we can actually only assume that they dressed like that or used the certain tools. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of guesswork in the end, of course, but you can still make an educated guess because, if they find a Vogue magazine, sure, there are people who will have worn that stuff, but did everyone wear that stuff? Probably not.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Do you want to pass the mic over here, and maybe we can get some input from? Yeah.
We're gonna swap.
There we go. Yeah.
So what? Yeah. I guess how accurate do you think we've got it? You can put the disclaimer in first, and then nothing you say counts because you disclaimed it first.
I think it's very difficult to say how correctly we interpret
But in
Viking.
your personal opinion, how accurate is it? Do you think we're close, or do you think we're...
This is exactly how it's complicated was
It's complicated.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very complicated. Because I study texts, and my Viking Age woman lived in the 9th century. The texts are starting from the 11th, 13th century, so that's already like 200, 300 years in between.
Yeah, that's a good... I think that's something people need to remember as well. When we see it comes out so quickly, this like 9th to 10th century, and you just think, oh, it's only 100 years. It's like, think about how different it was 100 years from now.
Yeah, exactly.
And how different it will be in 100 years from now in the future.
So are we close? I don't know.
Go on, pick one there. Do you think we're closer than not?
He really wants you to make a choice here.
Yeah, I see.
Of course. You don't have to. You don't have to. But you're not getting away with it, Frederick. I want one of you.
Well, so to make it safe for me then, it's complicated.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I think it's obvious that we don't know everything. I mean, we have very limited sources. The written sources we have are all, Christian, even though I think that somehow is overemphasized by certain people. But there's still only a small fragment of the pre-Christian worldview that we have access to. And I think that's a very tragic part. It would be nice to have like a Nordic version of Plato or Homer or something like that, that would have written large poems or philosophical treatises. And who knows, maybe in the future, maybe in some Icelandic farm, buried deep underground, we will find this. It's not likely. It's
I'm still betting on somewhere in Vatnajökull.
Yeah,
deep in the ice. Yeah, there will be a Bible.
So I think that's the problem, is that there is limited. So and that's also one of the reasons I think, from my perspective, it's very interesting to see the reception of the Viking Age, because it continually changes, because we have the ability to do that. I'm sure if we went into a time machine and we went back to the Iron Age, it wouldn't look like completely different from certain images, because we have some understanding of how houses were built and stuff like that. It wouldn't be like there were flying saucers and like some Aristotelical fantasy world, but it's still there's still very, very little we know, and I think that we also have to be open that we will experience and know more, and that will change our understanding of it, which I think is also exciting part of it.
So if you could find the magic book that told you everything, would you want to, or do you like not? Do you like not knowing? Because I think part of that's the joy of I think that's why so many people are interested in like the Viking Age and Nordic mythology, because we know so little that you can then, especially for like the everyday person, you can apply it to your own life in your own way, and you can interpret it and change it and mold it to fit you, because there are so many gaps there. But as an academic, would you, if you could just find the book that just said everything?
I mean, if there was such a magical book, some type of like
the Bible,
Viking Age Necronomicon.
Yeah.
But yes, of course you would read it. But it would probably be very, I think the tragedy
would you share it?
Yeah, no. But I mean, if you look at this I can't remember, there was those hidden runes, there was this kind of mystical runes that people tried to understand what they were saying, but when they finally managed to sort of decipher them, there was actually quite mundane stuff, basically kiss me and stuff like that. And to me, there's a certain appeal to the mystery of it, without question. When we seek sort of finding the mystery, it's always very fascinating. Often when we find the answer, it's often rather, it loses a sense of its magic. There is no question about it. So yeah, finding such a book when if you actually could see, okay, so they did the rituals in this way, and yes, somehow I think, of course you would read it. Of course you would love to find such a book. But yeah, there is a certain enchantment that will probably go away. That's
I
true.
know they do always say, "Don't meet your heroes," because you might be.
Yeah.
No, I met Matthias, and take from that what you will.
Hey, I posted a picture of your ass on the Instagram
You had
on
to
a
zoom-
burial
You
mound.
had to
Come
zoom,
on.
you had to zoom in there.
Yeah, you can't really see it. Then. Yeah, but-
Matthias, what do you think if you could find the book? It doesn't have to be a book. Could be they might have video cameras.
Okay. So
if you could just
ancient
find
Viking video cameras documenting every little aspect of life back then. I would want that. Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah.
But
And-
we're going to have that.
Do we?
Do we?
Nope.
Not exactly.
There are some really
Give him the
important
mic.
problems with this.
Oh, I love a surprise guest.
Surprise guest.
So,
Oh,
love a
first
surprise
tell us
guest.
your name.
I'm Ragnar Ortenli. I work as an archaeologist in Vestfold and Telemark. And basically, archaeologists searched landscape here for a decade.
Mhm.
We have 950 Viking Age burials. There are more halls at Borre than we have the farm. We don't have the farmhouses. We
Mhm.
can't see their lives. So we get the dead, but we don't know the farms. We have one house that's Viking Age, which is badly preserved, and half a part of one. We don't know anything about the actual Viking Age farm. And of course, most of these dead people are farmers.
Mhm.
And then you have a certain elite. So we can see the elite better. We can't see the average person. He's not here. And the only thing we learn from our work is the more we find, the more complex the Viking Age gets.
Mhm.
So you had a tale. Ottar had been in Skiringsal. We excavated Kaupang, all sold. Then suddenly in 2012, they got this small trading port nearby Gokstad. Oops, there are two of these trading ports operating at the same time. Oi, how do we cope with this? So we get new knowledge all the time with geophysics, with metal detecting finds. And the only thing we see is it's getting more complex, but we don't find the place they live at.
That's very fascinating.
It is. Okay, so a new question that came into my head. This is how,
You
this is how
just-
this
you-
works for me.
you're
Just
skipping
stuff. No. It's kind of
go
linked.
with your social
So how damaging do you think popular like TV shows like Vikings, Last Kingdom, The Northman, these things that show Vikings always in this warrior role, very much the like puffed up version, kind of the like
No, but
it's-
that's the contrast between the complex Viking Age, right, and then the simplified Viking Age.
That's so to the again the layperson that just watches these shows and then assumes, because they don't necessarily listen to this podcast or listen to or do any deep dive at all.
Mhm.
So they don't understand that we know so little about this. They don't understand that in reality we know fuck all about the Viking Age. And so to them, they watch these shows and I guess they just assume that it's all based on fact. It's all based on a lot of research and it's kind of going to be accurate. I guess, do you think that that's damaging overall, or do you think it's positive in that it brings people into it?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
That just popped up in my head. Didn't even
it's,
pre-plan that one. It could be. I mean, that was one of my first steps, was TV shows and that kind of thing. And like, oh, I'm interested in this. And then met this guy. He's like, no, fuck them shows. Everything's wrong in them.
Well, this is the double-edged sword, right? Because on the one hand, these types of shows they create interest. They they inspire people in many different ways to do many different things. They even inspire more of such shows, right? So that is part of keeping a modern quote unquote Viking culture alive. And on the other hand, they, somebody watches Vikings and then he go out there and is like, hey, I'm gonna get a big beard and shaved sides, and then I'm gonna put a little hairpin in.
Oh my soul. I guess I deserve that.
No, it's a cool hairdo, dude. But that's like that's something
like
that
a sad
happens.
boy gift now.
That's something that happens, and one of the things that comes out of that is a whole look, right? So generating
all right, you've said it now. You've done it once.
Generating contemporary culture too, right? And then those people, some of those people, they then become interested in the actual facts and of whatever facts we can even know about the Viking Age.
This is your chance to say something nice about me.
Trying to chase down that deeper knowledge and become smarter and smarter. And after 126 episodes,
you can do it. Compliment me.
There. So I mean that's the beauty of it as well. I don't think,
but I imagine it's a rare occasion that someone does.
I don't think so. I think this is an example. I think Midgardsblot is an example of it's not a rare occasion. I think the average person who has some kind of popular interest in Vikings or interest generated from popular stuff in Vikings probably also does seek out information as best as they can in so many different ways. So I think ultimately, whatever is being created in popular culture, I think ultimately it's for the better, rather than being, being a dead thing that has ceased to exist in our minds at all.
You've deleted Facebook, so you don't see the shit storm that still goes on Facebook. And so I think it's very rare that somebody watches the shows and then takes the dive and really wants to learn, because we still put episodes out where we've spoken to legitimate world leading scholars in their field, and we'll put it out, and then someone on Facebook will go, no, he's wrong. And that happens all the time. We get comments like, that's not how it was. It's like, okay, did you listen to the episode? No. I was like, well, the want for people to learn more, I think, is terrifying, because when I took this journey, I guess I read a bunch of sagas online and all the stories and thought we knew everything and knew what Valhalla was and Asgard, knew all this stuff from what I read very easily, kind of by Googling. And then the more I spoke with you, you're like, well, that's wrong. That's wrong. And that people get upset by that. A lot of people maybe don't want to accept that everything they've read, even if it's going back to what we said about the academics, you guys do for 10 years, but some people get upset if they do for 10 days. They've done 10 days reading and they think they know everything about Vikings, and they get really upset if you go, well, that's wrong. And then they get into these massive arguments about it. So I think it's tough for people sometimes to be told it's wrong, and they don't want to accept that.
I think the problem is more Facebook than people.
Probably.
No, honestly.
But I do like getting
the media is the message here, right? So I think what happens with Facebook is just a very problematic social situation on social media. And
let's get Facebook now. We've trash scholars. Let's go for Facebook now.
Yeah. No, all of a sudden you can't find our stuff on social media any longer.
Probably
Meta banned us. We are quickly running out of time with the panel talk. So, Daniel, I wanted to ask you if there's a single last question you would like to fire off to any of the panelists that we have here with us.
Nope. No, I think we covered it quite well. Yeah. I guess I want to ask whether because we got the scholars sat on one side. I don't know if we did this on purpose, and then like the more like experimental stuff over here. Do you guys have anything that you'd like to ask, or any beefs? If you want to, if anyone said anything maybe you didn't agree with, or like, oh, here we go.
Yeah. As scholars, of course, archaeologists. For me, sorry, we're doing one side to the other, right? For me as a storyteller, what would be interesting for you? What would you see? Would like to see back in the stories, the myths?
Ooh, I like that one.
Well, as an archaeologist, I'll go straight for that. Straight for that one. I mean, this kind of goes back a little bit to the previous question and the popular culture stuff. One of the things that irritates the hell out of me, particularly with the popular culture, and what I would like to see back in stories, is an end to the hypermasculinity that's grown up through centuries of Christian-dominated study of Viking Age stories. That's where you very much get a sense of kind of other gender roles than big manly men being edited out. From a practical point of view in the archaeology myself, my specialism in metalworking, I'm very much on the lookout for, and in tune with other academics working in non-ferrous metalworking, we're looking out for signs of women particularly being involved in metalworking. That seems to be a strong probability in places where metalworking's happening in domestic contexts, so that understanding of society and understanding that, that things in the Viking Age probably weren't as they then were 200-300 years later is the kind of understanding I'd like to see a bit more. And if the storytelling can reflect the sort of the ways that, that kind of our modern culture is kind of viewing the Viking Age society and losing some of the prejudices that we've developed in the last 1,000 years, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
It seems like you need to come and listen to one of my stories. And for you?
Oh, piggyback on the back of that. Also, how important do you think it is to, on the flip side of that, not let modern perception kind of go back and kind of influence what we do know, and kind of people want to put things in that maybe aren't there?
Well, that is difficult because our perception is always going to be our modern perception. But what we have to accept is that the perception passed down to us by previous generations of study, it was also a modern perception. So, reflexively eliminating, sort of prejudices and biases from there is a hell of a job to do. But, it's worth doing.
It is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Pass on the mic. We want to hear more opinions on this topic.
Also, as you look at this series, it's like it's so dark and colorless. We know from the Oseberg, we know from the Gox that bright colors, but of course they evaporated when they excavated it. But to kind of bring the colors and the glam, and they were not afraid of that.
Yeah, we have already visited mullet Vikings, and I'd love to see some glam rock Vikings as well.
Yeah.
So bringing the colors back is good. And you talked a bit about the kind of when you build the Viking ships, you rebuild them. So when they went it one more further, and they also, instead of buying a sail, made the sail, you realized how much textile work that the sail is probably worth more than the ship.
Yeah.
So you kind of value the textiles much more, and the kind of the small, every spindle whorl, everything that you need. You need 1.3 kilometers of rope. You need a big sail. You need so the complexity in that, and also it's only done because somebody actually bothered to actually make one.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives us a huge lesson. And of course, then at least bring the colors back.
Yeah.
What we know about them.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because I think people focus on the glamorous stuff like the axes, the swords, the shields, and things like that, and forget about a sail and how expensive that would be and how important it is. But it's not cool. That people just lose that, I guess, and forget. They want to know all about, like I said, the fighting things and the things that they think are cool. So.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So is it still on? Okay.
Yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think glam Vikings would be great as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think I really would like to see it. I mean, sometimes it can be a little bit, even though I mean I can kind of like that darker aesthetic as well, but it can be very, very boring. And I think the big problem with the kind of reception of the Viking Age is that it becomes so repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of the Vikings, Northmen, all of them, they all look the same. And it's like after a while you've seen the kind of hypermasculinity and a kind of a masculine image for both men and women at the contemporary reception of it. But it becomes, I think the big problem with the reception and particularly modern storytelling is to avoid being repetitive, because it can become extremely boring. I mean, disregarding all other aspects of it just becomes mindlessly boring. Mm-hmm. So do something more fun and something else. Everything doesn't have to be like the end of the world stuff and killing, even though it's a fun story. But so that
but
would be
probably played out a little too much at this point.
Yeah, it has been done a couple of times, particularly like the whole Vikings didn't care about anything else but just killing people and going on ship raids. It's fun to a degree, but after you've seen it in TV series after TV series after TV series, and you have bands basically playing the same kind of story that's all about, the same repetitive stuff. So more nuance and more fun, basically. Yeah, so
more Viking love stories.
Little
rom-com.
Viking rom,
Vikings the rom-com. I wouldn't see it myself, but it would be interesting to see.
I did have one more question. I forgot.
Oh, okay. You don't want to hear from Sophie first?
I think I want more women, but not the Valkyries or the Shield Maidens, but just the women, because they were badass women. And also the Old Norse sagas, they were more about storytelling, how you told a story, than what was fact or fiction. So I think that's maybe also something to keep in mind, that it's all about the storytelling and how you bring it than what you tell. So, yeah.
Okay. My last question. How important do you think the Christian sources are to the modern perception? I know you mentioned it briefly earlier, Frederick, because I think they get shut down very quickly in modern days. Is this certainly, again, I don't know, I can't speak for like the academic side of things, but against like the everyday person, they hear the word Christian and kind of just go, fuck that must be wrong. Ignore all of that. But then, with Snorri, like we get a lot from that, and it is very Christianized, but there are things that we can take from it and learn from it. So yeah, what's your opinion on that, Matthias?
Well, it's an interesting dichotomy between this notion of a hegemonic paganism and a hegemonic Christianity in this material. Honestly, I don't think you can break it up that way. I agree with you, Frederick, that to an extent the problematic aspect of the Christian content of some of these sources is played up too much. On the other hand, what we also should keep in mind is that Christianity at the time, the Christianity that existed in these communities that were writing these stories, is an entirely different kind of Christianity than any of us are familiar with today. Yeah. We should keep in mind that the type of Christianity that was generated in Scandinavia, but not just Scandinavia, the rest of Europe too, in many ways, incorporated a bunch of elements that we would classify as pre-Christian too, right? We should also keep in mind that the average person living on their farm somewhere in some kind of Scandinavian community, or I don't know, even an Italian community and a French community for that matter, or Polish, or wherever we are in Europe, their world and spirituality revolves around the location they live in, which means that there is, to a greater extent, the chance of various kinds of survivals in this time period that we call the medieval period. And then they bring out the pitchforks and the torches and start burning witches. And that's where you get a solid Christian cleansing. It was like the burning age in that begins in the late 1400s and escalates through the 1500s and really culminates in the 1600s. That is a massive regulation project in Europe where what we're seeing it depends on the communities that we're talking about too. Like the witch hunt in Europe is a different thing in Belgium compared to different communities in Germany or Denmark or Sweden or Finland and so on. And we see different types of peoples being targeted for different reasons and so on, except of course it always comes down to an accusation of having committed some kind of offense to Christianity. What comes as a result from that is homogenization of societies in Europe to a much greater extent, and also streamlining of societies in Europe that follows the centralized power and what they want. So what that means then is that when we're looking at a text that was written in medieval Iceland in the 1200s, before this process had really gotten started, well, we can theorize at least that there are more survivals from a pre-Christian context than we actually maybe even understand. And that I'm not talking about like, oh, cool descriptions of rituals or there's an elf over here or something like that. It could be something that you would completely miss, essentially, because you don't have the capacity, neither as a scholar or a layperson, you don't have the capacity to actually see it, right? So that's something to keep in mind, that we could be blind to survivals that are just, slip under the radar because we're looking for all the fancy stuff, as you were pointing out before, with the swords and the axes and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway from that was when you said the Christianity of then is not the same Christianity of now. And I think that so many people just look at their dislike of Christianity in modern times and then want to just dismiss everything and what we might learn in the past. And you see it over and over and over again, like I say, on Facebook groups or whatever. As soon as anybody mentions anything Christian, it's almost like the shutdown to anybody's source of knowledge. If it's like, oh, that's Christian, and they kind of just shit on it straight away. Whereas there are things we can learn from it, and like I say, it's not the Christianity of today. It's what today would probably consider as being pagan or is got closer to it.
Yeah, I mean that's at least a possibility that could be the case. Yeah.
Let's see what you did there. Should we wrap this up?
Yeah, let's wrap this up. Thank you so much to our panelists.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for a surprise guest as well.
There we go. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. First ever live recording.
Yeah, first ever live recording. Thank you to the audience as well who stuck this out.
Paired with us. Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. Awesome. Perfect. Brilliant.
Cool. All right.
Let's go get beer.
Let's go get beer.
Yeah.